I'm just really excited to have a couple of minutes, 30 minutes to chat with Alex. I think the first time I had the chance to sit opposite a table from you was probably at Hot Numbers across from the Eng department 7 years ago or something like that. And I distinctly remember at the time, his narrative has not changed for 7 years. It's basically been end-to-end deep learning is the way to solve self-driving. Why were you convinced of that 7 years ago?
Well, I'm still, there's a ton that has changed over the years. The core strategy and vision hasn't, but the way we've solved this problem, oh man, I'm so excited about what end-to-end deep learning can do today. Back in the day when we had 20-layer CNNs, it was a very, very different game to the multimodal transformers that we have today. I think the thing that convinced me was there's a couple of things there. The first one is I'd spent many years of my life hacking around with robotics, dealing with thresholds, saturation limits, all of these kind of hyperparameters that you have to deal with, and seeing how brittle it was, how if you tweak them just right, you might get a demo together, but change something in the environment and it completely falls over. Then I'd been exposed to this end-to-end learning systems where we trained a segmentation system on 300 images from Cambridge. And then when I went home to New Zealand and tried it on a photo of our street outside my family's house, it worked, it generalized with no data there. So I think it was the generalization capabilities, the ease of letting data do the hard work, and extending this argument beyond just perception to end-to-end control. And I think there was certainly a lot of inspiring things happening there at the time, like deep Q learning that we saw from DeepMind solving the control of Atari games, to call out one example that inspired me. But that required millions of training episodes in simulation. And so I thought that with the kind of things we were seeing in perception and being able to compress the state in a more intelligent way, and surely those incredible ability to actually learn control, of course, the trend was just going the end-to-end learning would gobble up all of this and more. And so that became pretty clear to me. I was seeing that robotics and self-driving was going down the troubling way of more infrastructure, hand-coded rules, enormous amounts of capital, and so that led to a pretty deep belief. But it's not like you have a eureka moment. It's years of sustained work on a problem that develops these beliefs. And I would be amiss to say it was like I woke up one day and just saw the future. That's totally false.
But along the way, one of the major themes that you've perhaps abstracted from these details is the idea of embodied AI, embodied intelligence. What are the kind of nuggets of that thesis, and what does it mean to you?
Embodied AI, I define by simply it's AI that has access to the physical world. And there's going to be many examples of that in the future. I'd actually argue that I think if you ask a member of the public in a couple of decades what they think of AI, while of course chatbots and search engines and other knowledge-based systems are going to be game-changing for society, I think most people will ground their interaction with AI with something physical because that's the world we live in. Embodied AI has a number of interesting challenges that are distinct from cognitive AI, language models and things like that. They have to be embedded in physical systems. Safety is a huge concern, dealing with the open-ended environment and things like this. But ultimately, the promise this brings is being able to improve our quality of life, take time away from us for things we don't want to do. And that requires you to be able to build an effective relationship with a machine like this, being able to delegate tasks to it, trust it, and for it to be able to operate effectively. So that's the sort of premise and vision. And I think these examples are going to range from domestic robotics to manufacturing to, of course, self-driving cars. The thing that's been clear to us since the start about why we've been so obsessed about self-driving is it has access to data at scale. There are vehicle platforms today that we can operate on. And of course, there's a viable business model. That's maybe not so present in areas like humanoid robotics or manufacturing. That's probably a little bit more like self-driving was back in 2015, 2016. In fact, many of the production vehicles that are being produced today by some of the leading manufacturers, they now have redundant surround sensing, redundant actuation, as well as a couple of hundred to 1,000 tops GPU in there. And that's pretty exciting. There's going to be millions of these kind of platforms that are ready for embodied AI. And so that's why I think self-driving will be the first example where we get to interact with embodied AI at scale, but it's just the tip of the iceberg.
Mm-hmm. And I think back then after your PhD, you had a potential role or offered a role at Trinity, and you decided to start a company instead. Looking back, like, why did you do that? Why is a company the right way or the right vehicle to explore this thesis and push the envelope? And why is academia not the right fit for your ambitions back then?
Yeah, quite simply, it's the fastest way to achieve this mission, most effective way. I love time in academia, and I think there's a really key role for that, for some space to think about these ideas. I remember I bounced around a number of different fields, from geometry to Bayesian deep learning to SLAM to many others, and the ability to learn, absorb, connect to your ideas was really special, and I think that's super important. I had the chance to be exposed to a couple of startups through friends or as an advisor, or even joining one for a period of time over in Silicon Valley. And what just blew my mind about this is a space I wasn't really exposed to before, but just the ability to bring together a team around one mission, the ability to bring together diverse skill sets and infrastructure that just as a PhD student, I was just forever fixing small little electrical and mechanical problems on the robots, but actually bringing together professional scale, and then of course the pace that you can go with commercial. I'm a big believer in problem-driven research. I think problems, and in particular machine learning, when you have a data set and a metric like a measurement or a simulator, that's what really drives results. And I think having a clear problem often is, we often see people with a hammer and search for a nail. And I think having a clear problem just drives a sense of focus, creativity, and also a passion that, that is absent elsewhere. So those things were really what motivated me.
Yeah. And back then you were probably in the small minority of one in terms of companies that really believed in this approach. How do you kind of maintain conviction over a long period of time that you're making progress in the right direction? To your investors, you produced this really great report that I always found was very data-driven in how you were assessing your progress. But can you maybe peel back? Why is it that you still had conviction? How did you, every year, win a few more believers until it seems like now you're kind of voted the consensus approach?
Well, we've certainly still got work to do to, I think, earn that right. But the interesting thing for me was it was always a when, not if question, that robotics would be driven by end-to-end AI. And certainly along the last 7 or 8 years, we've gone forwards, backwards, sideways. It certainly hasn't been a monotonically increasing journey. But I've never doubted those core principles, even for a second. I think now my mindset's often, if there's we had so many existential problems along the way, but if there was one, it's just, okay, next problem, how do we solve it? And just being in that kind of flow state. I think, going to events like this is a great chance to step out, zoom out, and see where the industry's at. But I think seeing little incremental bits of progress where we could stand on shoulders of giants and show little breakthroughs was special. And then even just a lot of the milestones that aren't perhaps externally relevant, but internally there were a bunch of things along the way that made that really compelling.
Yeah. And when you see today's environment where somebody with your pedigree would leave and start a company, I would hazard to guess that they wouldn't raise $3 million or however much it was back then. Maybe there's an extra zero, $2 million. That's not even adjusting for FX, I think, back then. So do you think the kind of problem you're working on is addressable on the same kind of budget? If you were to start today, would you do anything differently? Do you have some kind of words of wisdom to share with folks who have the option to raise a lot of money and maybe shouldn't, or vice versa?
I think one of the most important things to be able to do as an entrepreneur, as a researcher, is in resource allocation, whether that's time or capital. And how you focus that and work on that is like I think I worked on so many things, say, in my PhD, and actually knowing when to cut things and to stop working on things was a harder skill than knowing what to work on. Yeah. But when it comes to getting going, I think everyone at the start, we raised $2 million. I don't know what that is in today's pounds, for example, but everyone's like, well, what are you guys doing? There's just been 3 or 4 companies that have raised $1 billion. Like, the space is solved. This is a joke. And I think capital constraint really produces innovation, and that's one of the biggest things that I'm curious to see how we perform as a team with the capital that we have now today. How can we maintain a sense of rigor, focus, staying lean? That's something that we talk a lot about at Wayve at the moment. What it ensures that you do is it ensures you innovate. I see this so much with GPUs. We have an incredible cluster today in Azure that allows us to train multi-billion parameter embodied AI models. And that's no mean feat, by the way, because the data we're dealing with is hundreds of petabytes of video data that it can't all be stored locally on the GPU node. So it's a really interesting engineering challenge to actually be able to train on this kind of data at scale, not to mention to make the algorithms converge to a smart policy. But the point being is that if you have an abundance of resource, then I remember the times I had this when I was training models. You just send out silly ablations that aren't really meaningful. But when you're forced to think critically, and I think that's a real driver for innovation. So I hope that we see many more ideas come out that should make changes that really challenge the status quo with a very small amount of funding, and I think that's almost a prerequisite.
Mm-hmm. And in your domain, it's not only about the technology and finding problems that are tractable and the right approaches, and then capital formation and trying to figure out business models, but it's also legislation and operating in the real world. And for those who haven't watched the company, I mean, you scored a pretty big feat in the UK by really moving legislation to be much more forward-thinking for public testing, I believe, and perhaps more. Like, at what point in your company's journey did you realize this was more than a technology and product problem, but also like a policy problem, and you had to invest in this like public education and sort of policy influence?
Yeah, I think we've been very focused in what we're tackling and also what scope is ours and what isn't. We've taken a very partner-first approach from the start, right? We are building the embodied AI software that we want to license. We don't build vehicles. We don't want to operate them. We try and push as much of that non-core scope to partners as we can and lean on some of the most incredible businesses in the world, from Microsoft and NVIDIA being two of our most important partners when it comes to scale, to many of the leading automotive manufacturers around the world that have built truly excellent robotic platforms. And so, particularly about regulation, we actively didn't focus on this at the start. Of course, we're in a highly regulated industry. Regulation is critical to self-driving and, more importantly, public acceptance to build trust in embodied AI. But I'd argue that it wasn't the critical path for us at the start. If we couldn't solve a system that could actually do useful work, what's the point of regulation? So we were quite disciplined to not go into that at the start, even though, we had some conversations, we were smart about the space, but we weren't actively spending time. We were just really focused on what was the hardest problem. Yeah. Because if you can't solve the hardest problem, you're going to have a really unhealthy reminder down the journey. So we were focusing on getting the AI to work first. Then about engineering scale, we started to lean more into this probably 3 years ago to begin with. And I'm thrilled that 3 or 4 weeks ago, the UK government just legalized self-driving with the 2024 Automated Vehicles Act, which is epic for our business and for many others around the world.
Mm-hmm. One of the remarkable things for me, just as an observer of you and how you've grown, is just like how many things you've learned, like from 7 years ago as a PhD student to now operating, a huge company with lots of resources, allocation, different teams, different geos. Like, how did you manage to kind of keep upskilling as a CEO founder and not petering off and hiring an external CEO? And you didn't even start as CEO. I think you were more on the technical side and then grew into it.
Yeah, I've made so many mistakes along the way. I think key thing is to have great people around you. But the role completely changes year on year. And I think, you learn a lot of things quite quickly, that you're never going to please everyone. You've got to, I wouldn't be here today if I hadn't made many tough decisions. But also, it's just been, as soon as we got good at an operating mode, we've outgrown it. And, a year ago, we were a very tight, centralized team. And now at the scale and pace of things that we're working on, we're really pushing a lot more empowerment around our organization, looking to, we've got an amazing management team that I really, really trust very deeply. But it's also a super exciting time because so much of this is about timing. I think today, if you think about, for all of us that are involved in the robotics industry, so many things we've been struggling with for decades are now possible to be resolved. We can build systems that truly generalize. We can build systems that can be simulation systems that can really simulate very complex dynamic scenes. Keep an eye out for some work we'll be releasing on that next week, where very complex urban scenes where you have car doors opening or deformable pedestrians and cyclists that have very unpredicted behavior. The ability to understand these kind of environments is amazing. Actually, zooming out, it's been interesting to see how different fields of AI have driven a lot of this growth. Like during my PhD, it was all about computer vision. Things like batch normalization or residual connections were some of the biggest breakthroughs that were driven by image classification. But I guess over the last 5 years, it's been all about language.
Yep.
It's been pushing scale and things like that. And so there's a lot of things to learn going forward. What do you think are some of the most open and interesting problems in AI right now?
I get put in the hot seat. I mean, I think just like kind of like long range reasoning of agents. I think a lot of people want to build web browsing agents and systems that can do complex tasks, but it doesn't seem like they can go that far. And so I just wonder what it's going to take to be able to solve these tasks. And I think to that degree, like some of the work that you did on like Lingo and Gaia is quite interesting. I mean, it's fascinating how it's a bit of an evolution of that, like learning to drive by predicting the future work that was popular a couple of years ago. And I asked myself the question of, is the work that you've done there translatable to other domains like the desktop or?
Yeah. I totally agree. I think planning versus reasoning is a really interesting problem about how much raw zero-shot intelligence or how much planning should we expect in these agents. I'm going to call out three that I'm really excited about at the moment. Huge problems that actually I think if we talked about, I was speaking about problem-driven research. I think there are three of problems that are truly central to embodied AI. It's safety, simulational measurement, and scale. Just to call out safety to begin with, I mean, we've seen in the news recently some of the cognitive AI space start to pull back from safety and really focus on the application layer and commercial exploitation. In embodied AI, safety is everything. We've got to be able to trust these systems, and that means making them understandable, predictable. I think predictability is the key underrated thing here. When we have these stochastic AI systems, how can we make them predictable? Like when you bring out a system, particularly if you're clear about the scope, it's okay if it can't do some things, but it needs to be predictable in what it can't do so that we can build systems and structures around it. But safety is such an important area, and I think autonomous driving is it's existential to the space, and I think we are really intrinsically motivated to solve it. So I'm curious to see what the autonomous driving space builds that can really fundamentally solve the AI safety problem. Secondly, about simulational measurement, I think people often ask, if you go to a conference, not as smart as everyone in the room here, but like another one, you might get questions about AGI and these kind of things. And the first question is, how do you measure AGI? And similarly with driving, how do you measure driving intelligence? These kind of systems, they're not solved by one metric. It's a suite of different simulation systems that can test different aspects. And how do you balance, understand, and make sure that these systems are distributed across the domain that you care about? Or say in cognitive AI, it's like all these different tasks that we really want a system to be what we consider general. And I think getting measurement right is what, going back to the example I gave at the start, what deep Q learning did really well, because it's just a constrained environment that was just with a really clear one metric score. And getting measurement right for driving or for cognitive AI or AGI, that's such a challenging issue. And then thirdly, about scale, I mean, we're seeing no end to scale, and I think what I feel so stoked that Wayve is in the position today is that we have all of these ingredients of data, capital, compute, and the team to really push the boundaries of embodied AI scale, build something that can go beyond. I mean, these graphs just, you extrapolate them, they just keep going, and scale is really only limited by engineering capability right now. Yeah, those are the three of the things I think are most exciting, and they're pretty central to embodied AI.
Yeah, fantastic. Have any questions for Alex? This one at the front here.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hey.
Yeah.
Hey, Alex, thanks for your insights. I was curious, you mentioned one of the challenges of getting bigger is staying lean and staying innovative. What is your strategy for maintaining that, for doing that?
Yeah, so it's about being very clear on why you're doing what you're doing, very clear about the scope that you're taking on, and I think discipline around that is pretty critical. Specifically at Wayve, the fundraise that we just went through is awesome because it funds our entire business plan. But this doesn't mean we're going to go and burn this capital in a couple of years. I think as a deep tech company, one of the things I found the hardest, going through our journey is it's not just about raising the round, but how do you capitalize the entire journey, which can be long and challenging. And for us, a lot of that came down to strategic support, not just capital, but being able to lean on partners for scope. But then, secondly, being able to find the right long-term investors that aren't in the space because it's just hot and sexy at a given moment. Timing is really important here, but finding investors that are really deeply convicted about the space. And if you look at our cap table and our investors, I think you'll find a list of, I think, some of the most exciting, passionate people in embodied AI. But so scope and focus of the company is the key thing. And then the second thing comes down to culture. And we're actually refreshing our values internally at Wayve right now, because recognizing we're going into a different chapter. Now, of course, the values that we've had so far are, of course, the foundation, but being able to evolve them into the next stage is going to be key here. And so we're doing that work internally at the moment. I'm sure we'll publish some representation of it once it's done. But some of the key things there is that collaboration and efficiency becomes so more important. The idea that when you grow, people are just going to solve the problem is a real fallacy, because we're always going to be under-resourced. We're always going to be challenged when it comes to things. Our ambition just grows with the progress of our roadmap. And so making sure that we set the right expectations around that and ensure that we can continue to be bold and ambitious and work with efficiency is I think the key recipe here.
Go for it. Maybe speak loudly.
Thanks, Alex. If, say, there was no regulatory bottleneck, how far away do you think you are from the stage where you'd be happy to let all your cars loose on the road, have the public driving them?
Yeah, so I actually don't think regulation is the long pole in this space. It's a super important part of the problem, but I don't think it's the long pole. I think it's more around a lot of things around technology, increasingly supply chain, and bringing together commercial partnerships and the ecosystem and things like this. But not to say that regulation isn't critically important, and if we don't get it right, this whole promise won't work. But as for specific timing, we've also been careful to not publicly commit or set expectations that might add to hype that might be problematic in our space. And so I'm not going to give dates here if that's what you're after. But I can tell you that the sequence of things that I think is very important. I guess that also comes back to focus, is about not growing scope as a function of time, but growing scope as a function of progress, and being very careful about unlocking new expertise and resource and these kind of things. But Nathan kindly said that our vision hasn't changed since the start, but the way you go about implementing this, I think, has really, really grown. And one of the things I'm most proud about Wayve is we've been able to keep a very a mindset that can forego sunk costs and make sure that we continue to stay on the bleeding edge. Even look at our simulation stack. I mentioned about measurement, but we've gone from a model that started off with scene graphs and procedural worlds and things like that, to full now amazing end-to-end learned environments that can generate completely dynamic scenes that we can edit and control in ways that it's the same story, right? End-to-end learning and data-driven approaches are gobbling up the world. But anyway, so how to get self-driving out at scale. And I think this applies to a lot of robotic systems. I think going straight into full automation is risky and hard. Starting with a assistance or co-pilot approach, I think is beneficial. I think making sure that you get the data and measurement problem right is important, and building a sustainable business along the way. So what that means is that an approach starting with a geofenced city where you go and build out a fleet to show full autonomy first, lacks data and integration at scale. What we're doing now is deploying our system in vehicles around the world, working with some of the leading manufacturers to see it deployed as driver assistance. That gives us a scale of manufacturing integration. Super hard to get right in embodied AI. So much about this is that hardware, software system and integration. But it lets us get that right early, gives us revenue at scale, but more importantly, diverse data by becoming an embodied AI layer across the entire automotive industry. With that, I think that will put us in a really compelling position to grow these systems from driver assistance up to full autonomy in a really quick and performant way. So that's the sequence of things that I see. And starting with driver assistance also makes the regulation problem easier and allows us to take society along from the journey. So that's our firm belief of how that'll grow and what we need to get right. Let's see the specific timeline it executes on, but it's it's coming along very quickly.
Yeah, hi. Just going to lower the bar of the questions here a little bit. So two questions really. Firstly, why is the car so big? Like Waymo's got a big car. You guys are training on a big car. Is there a particular reason? Because I would have thought the problem would be easier to solve with a smaller car. And then the second one is, I guess the Waymo's already got driverless cars in a ring-fenced city, well, in a number of cities. Are you concerned about not getting your product to market quicker rather than going through partners, which I'm sure is a slower process?
We've really focused on building an embodied AI that's flexible and agnostic to the specific vehicle. So we operate a number of, I have to count them up, but a number of different vehicle platforms, from vans to passenger cars, with very different sensor configurations. Some are a single camera, some have surround cameras, some are camera radar. We've been working some LiDAR data. Our embodied AI should just understand what a sensor can or can't see, the information content in it, and what decision it's safe to make from that sensor setup. And in particular, how the vehicle geometry or size relates to the environment and these kind of things. I think as for the specific vehicle, I think we're going to see a ton of innovation in the space. Of course, today, passenger cars are usually 5-door vehicles that drive around, and so that's probably where we'll start because that's where scale is. But I think there'll be a ton of innovation, and I just want to ensure that our embodied AI is robust and flexible, that it can quickly adapt to new platforms as they come along. I think the end state will see a really heterogeneous set of mobility solutions. Of course, walking and micro-mobility and public transport is super critical. But when it comes to say, vehicle public transport or personal car ownership or things like this, we just want to make sure that we can continue to enable platform innovation and that our embodied AI can sit on top of that. As for speed, again, I think the fastest way to scale is through mass deployment, through driver assistance, through getting that exposure and building that business up. And I guess we'll have to see how it plays out. But I would watch very carefully at the speed of deployment of this strategy versus the straight to L4 retrofit approach. And it's not just about getting a pilot or a POC up there, but a viable, valuable, scalable system. That's what we all aim for as an industry.
I guess I just want to take a Wayve in London,
Me too.
He wants the Wayve app. Let's join me in thanking Alex for his time. We're going to do a quick coffee break now, so we can save some questions for that. Thanks,